So I'm going to transgress a little bit and go back to my childhood, the start of this sermon. I'm sure some of you may be able to remember what I'm going to first talk about. So secret codes and mysterious symbols, hidden meanings. I love the stuff. Did anybody have a secret decoding ring growing up? I don't remember if it was Dick Tracy or Batman or one of those shows, or even a decoder badge. There's a scene in the movie, A Christmas Story, where Ralphie and his brother used their decoding badges to decode a message from little orphan Andy. Be sure to drink her Ovaltine. Now, a little more serious. Some of the songs that you know contain secret codes. Historians say that African American spiritual songs sung by the slaves were really coded messages about how to escape. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, about the Underground Railroad. Steal Away, which describes how to sneak off at night. Wade in the Water, tells you to use creeks and rivers to hide your scent from the bloodhounds. Follow the Drinking Gourd, a reference to the Big Dipper in the sky, which points north. Some people believe the song, The 12 Days of Christmas, is really a coded messages about Roman Catholic doctrine in a time when Catholicism was outlawed. Secret codes have changed society and history. We are fascinated with codes. Back in May of 2001, long time ago, there was a very popular novel which became a movie, The Da Vinci Code, which said that Jesus really was married to Mary Magdalene, and the church tried to cover it up because the church hates women. And there are coded messages everywhere that point to the shocking truth, including the Mona Lisa, the Da Vinci's Last Supper, not kidding, and the Little Mermaid's red hair. Now, I can promise you one thing, the Da Vinci Code is 100% not accurate. But today, I'm going to talk about a different type of code. A code that is completely accurate, a code that you need to know about. This one is called the Transfiguration Code. Let's look at Mark 9 as we walk through it, and we're going to check the code, crack the code. Verse 7, 6 days later. Okay, hang on there, there's 6 days later. What happened the 6 days earlier? That's part of cracking the code. What happened the 6 days earlier was that Jesus took the disciples to a place called Caesarea Philippi, and he asked them the question, who do you say I am? Peter stepped up to the plate and said, well, you're the one we've been waiting for. You're the Messiah. And that was the right answer, but Peter really didn't know what it meant. Like most Jewish people, Peter thought the Messiah was a warrior king who would raise up an army and defeat the Romans and restore the Holy Land to Israel. So imagine Peter's surprise when Jesus starts talking about death and suffering and being rejected by the chief priest. And Peter pulls Jesus aside and says, Lord, this will never happen to you. And Jesus' response is rather pointed. Get behind me, Satan. For you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And then to make things worse, Jesus calls together the whole crowd and says, if anybody wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Again, this is not what the disciples had wanted to hear. They want to hear victory and glory and defeat of the enemy. For 6 days, they were chewing on this, mulling it over and thinking, what have we gotten ourselves into? We thought we found the Messiah, and that this guy wants to go to Jerusalem and die? What kind of Messiah is that? For 6 days, they thought about that. And then Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up to a high mountain apart by themselves. Now, here's the thing about mountains. Mountains are where you go to meet God. Abraham was tested on a mountain. Moses saw the burning bush on the mountain. Moses received the 10 Commandments on a mountain. Elijah heard the still, small voice of God on a mountain. Jesus is taking his 3 best friends up on a mountain. That tells us something special is about to happen. And when he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. Dazzling white clothes, what does that mean? Well, have you ever watched the trailer for a movie? You're sitting there in the theater in the show, you're about to preview of a movie that's coming up. This is the preview of the resurrection. This is what Jesus is going to look like when he rises from the dead. God is saying, look, the suffering and the death and the rejection that you're about to see, that's not all there is. Something grand and glorious is coming. Yes, the cross is going to be horrible, but then there's going to be the resurrection. And maybe right now, today, God is saying to you, look, I know what you're going through right now, and it's horrible, but that's not all there is. Easter's coming. Better days are ahead. Glory and resurrection are on the way. The dazzling white clothes are a preview of the resurrection. But then there's more in verse 4. And then there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Now wait a minute. What are these guys doing here? Well, Moses was the great lawgiver. The first 5 books of the Bible are referred to as the book of Moses, and they're called the Torah, which means the law. And Elijah was God's greatest prophet. So Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets, and for the Jewish people, that's the whole Bible, the law and the prophets. So this is God's way of saying that the entire Bible is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. All of God's dealings with humankind are brought together in this one man. Now let's look at verse 7. Then a cloud overshadowed them. The cloud is a symbol of the presence of God. God led the Israelites through the desert in a pillar of cloud. God spoke to Moses in a cloud. When Solomon built the temple, God's glory filled the temple in the form of a cloud. Cloud means the presence of God. And from the cloud there came a voice. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. That's what all of this has been leading up to. Remember the question Jesus asked 6 days earlier at Caesarea Philippi, who do you say I am? And Peter said, the Messiah. And Jesus said, the Messiah is going to suffer. And Peter said, oh, no, you're not. And Jesus said, oh, yes, I am. You better get with the program. Because if you're following me, you're going to suffer too. And to drive home the point, Jesus takes Peter up on the mountain into the presence of God. So he can hear God say, Jesus is right. He is my son. And yes, he's going to suffer, but that's not all there is. His suffering will lead to glory. His death will lead to resurrection. God says, this is my son. So when he talks about suffering and death and resurrection, listen to him. And as soon as God says that, it's over. Verse 8. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore but only Jesus. The cloud disappears, and Moses and Elijah disappear, and Jesus' clothes go back to being dirty and dingy once again. Jesus looks like a normal human being, except now they know he's not. He's not a normal human being. Yes, he is human, but he's also the Son of God, who emptied himself and became a servant so that he could give his life as a ransom for many. And here's what this means to you and to me. Do you know Jesus as he is revealed in the Transfiguration? In other words, do you know Jesus as the Son of God who suffered, died, and rose again to save you and me? Have you made a conscious decision to put your faith in this man who's more than a man? The Transfiguration Code tells us that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and of the prophets. All of God's dealing with humankind are brought together in this one man. And now he stands before you and says, "Who do you say I am?" There are a lot more important questions you have to answer during your lifetime. Where are you going to go to college? What are you going to do for a job? Who are you going to marry? Of course, that might be to Kurt. Who are you going to marry? Which football team are you going to root for? Dallas or Kansas City or maybe the 49ers? There's a lot of important questions, but the most important question is the one that Jesus asked. Who do you say I am? Your answer to that question changes everything. Do you know Jesus as he is revealed in the Transfiguration? Suffering does not have the last word. Remember that the Transfiguration happens right after Jesus predicts his death and right before he starts on the road to Jerusalem. He's about to enter into a time of horrible suffering, but before that starts, he and the disciples get a preview of the glory that's coming. The Transfiguration Code says that whatever you're going through right now is not all there is. There's hope, even in the midst of great pain. God shows up and says, look, here's a preview of better things to come. Your suffering does not have to have the last word. You don't get to stay on the mountaintop. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. In other words, Peter says, let's stay here, let's camp out. Let's just hang out and bask in the glory of the mountaintop experience. But you don't get to do that. Eventually, you have to go down the mountain to where the problems are. And life is hard. And you have to face the same day, everyday struggles. Now, don't get me wrong. The Transfiguration Code shows us that the mountaintop experiences are important because it's on the mountaintop where we see Jesus in a new way. I hope you, like myself, have had some mountaintop experiences in your life, maybe a spiritual retreat or a Presbyterian pilgrimage, maybe a revival meeting or a youth beach trip or a really powerful worship service. I hope you've had some mountaintops, but you have to understand the purpose of mountaintops is to help us see Jesus in a new way so that we can follow him back down the mountain and towards the cross. Mountaintops are the exception, not the norm. They're designed to prepare us. They're designed to strengthen us. They're designed to give us what we need to deal with in everyday life. Mountaintops are where we go to meet with God and get a fresh vision that keeps us going when we come back down. But you don't get to stay on the mountain. So there's the Da Vinci Code, the Enigma Code, but the Transfiguration Code is the one you really need to know because it shows you who Jesus really is. And it proclaims and it promises you that your suffering does not have to be the last word. And it gives you a fresh vision that prepares you to come down the mountain and follow Jesus to the cross. Thanks be to God. Amen.